The San Francisco skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky as luxury cars lined up outside the St. Regis Hotel. The annual Hope for Tomorrow charity gala was in full swing, drawing Silicon Valley's elite, entertainment stars, and sports legends to raise funds for underprivileged youth programs across California. The hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with the soft murmur of conversation, clinking champagne glasses, and the gentle melody of a string quartet. Stephen Curry adjusted his black Tom Ford tuxedo one last time before stepping out of his Tesla Model S. The valet greeted him with the practiced smile reserved for A-list celebrities, but Stephen's mind was elsewhere. Despite attending dozens of these events over the years, tonight felt different somehow. The crisp October air carried a hint of nostalgia that he couldn't quite place. "Stephen, over here!" called James Peterson, the event coordinator, rushing toward him with the kind of enthusiasm that came from securing a three-time NBA champion as the evening's keynote speaker. "The photographers are ready for you on the red carpet." Stephen nodded, flashing his trademark warm smile as camera flashes erupted around him. He moved through the routine with practiced ease. Pose, smile, wave, answer a few questions about the Warriors' upcoming season. But something felt off tonight. Maybe it was the way the autumn leaves reminded him of his college days at Davidson, or perhaps it was the fact that this particular charity focused on educational opportunities for young people, something that had always been close to his heart. "Mr. Curry, how does it feel to be back supporting education initiatives?" asked a reporter from ESPN. "Education has always been my priority," Stephen replied, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "My parents instilled in me the importance of giving back, and when I see young people getting chances they might not have had otherwise, it reminds me why we do this work." Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric yet refined. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents. The guest list read like a who's who of California society: tech moguls, philanthropists, fellow athletes, and entertainment industry veterans. Stephen made his rounds, greeting familiar faces and posing for photos, but his attention kept drifting to the large windows overlooking the bay. "You seem distracted tonight," observed his longtime friend and former teammate David West, who had flown in specifically for the event. "Everything okay?" Stephen paused, swirling the sparkling water in his glass. "Yeah, man, I don't know. Something about tonight feels significant. Can't put my finger on it." The evening's program was about to begin when Stephen noticed a commotion near the registration table. A woman was speaking quietly but firmly to one of the organizers, gesturing toward a credential that seemed to have some issue. Her back was to him, but something about her posture, the way she tilted her head when she spoke, sent a jolt of recognition through his chest. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats," announced the master of ceremonies. "We'll be beginning our program in just a few moments." Stephen moved toward his designated table at the front of the room, but his eyes kept returning to the woman at the registration desk. The lighting made it difficult to see clearly, and he told himself he was imagining things. After all, it had been nearly 15 years since college. People change. But as she turned slightly to thank the organizer, he caught a glimpse of her profile, and his heart stopped. The string quartet finished their piece, and in the moment of silence that followed, Stephen felt as if the entire room had faded away. Time seemed to slow as she turned around completely, scanning the room for her table assignment. When her eyes found his across the crowded ballroom, the years dissolved instantly. It was Maya. Maya Rodriguez had been his study partner, his confidant, and his first real love during his sophomore year at Davidson College. She was pursuing her master's in education while he was still figuring out if basketball would be his future or just a college experience. They had spent countless hours in the library, she helping him with his communications coursework, while he listened to her passionate plans to reform inner-city education. Their relationship had been a quiet, steady flame in the chaos of college life. While his teammates were hitting parties and chasing different girls every weekend, Stephen found himself drawn to Maya's intelligence, her genuine laugh, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about making a difference in children's lives. She had seen him not as the rising basketball star, but as Stephen, the young man who worried about his future, who called his parents every Sunday, who preferred quiet dinners to loud celebrations. But then came the NBA draft declaration, the suddenly intense schedule, the pressure from agents and scouts. Their relationship had become strained under the weight of his emerging fame and her dedication to her studies. The breakup had been mutual but heartbreaking. Two people who cared deeply for each other but were heading in different directions. Now, 15 years later, she stood across the room looking exactly like the woman he remembered, but with an added maturity that made her even more beautiful. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant updo, and she wore a midnight blue dress that spoke of success and confidence. But it was her eyes, those same warm, intelligent brown eyes, that transported him instantly back to those Davidson Library study sessions. Maya's initial shock was quickly replaced by a soft smile that reached her eyes. She raised her hand in a small wave, and Stephen found himself walking toward her before he even realized he was moving. "Excuse me," he murmured. To the people he passed, his focus entirely on reaching her. The ballroom seemed to part around him, conversations pausing as people recognized the NBA superstar moving with unusual urgency through the crowd. But Stephen was oblivious to the attention. All he could see was Maya, standing there like a bridge to a simpler time in his life, when basketball was just a game, and the future was a conversation topic rather than a daily reality. "Maya." Stephen's voice was barely above a whisper as he reached her, but in the bustling ballroom it felt like a shout. Up close, he could see the subtle changes that 15 years had brought. Laugh lines around her eyes, a confidence in her bearing that spoke of accomplishments and challenges overcome. But her smile was exactly the same as it had been when she'd wait for him outside the gym after practice. "Hello, Stephen." Her voice carried the same warm tone he remembered, though there was a professional polish to it now. "You look, well, you look exactly like I'd expect a 3-time NBA champion to look." They stood there for a moment, drinking each other in while the charity gala continued around them. The master of ceremonies was introducing the evening's sponsors, but neither of them heard a word. Stephen was acutely aware of the cameras positioned throughout the room, the social media managers documenting every moment of the event. But for once in his career, he didn't care about the optics. "What are you doing here?" he asked, then immediately shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh. "I mean, obviously you're here for the charity. I never expected to see your old study buddy at a high society fundraiser." Maya finished with a teasing smile that transported him instantly back to their college days. "I'm actually one of the keynote speakers tonight. I run the West Coast Educational Initiative now. We're one of the beneficiaries of tonight's fundraising." Stephen's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise and admiration. "You're Dr. Rodriguez? The education reform advocate I've been reading about?" "Maya, I had no idea. That's incredible." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "You've been reading about my work? Are you kidding?" The article in Education Weekly about your literacy programs in East Oakland was brilliant. I actually reached out to my foundation to see if we could support some of your initiatives. Stephen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Maya remembered from their college days when he was nervous or excited. "I never connected Dr. M. Rodriguez with my Maya." The possessive pronoun slipped out before he could stop it, and they both caught it. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of separate lives, different paths, and unspoken questions. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our first keynote speaker, Dr. Maya Rodriguez, founder and director of the West Coast Educational Initiative." Maya's eyes widened as she looked toward the stage, then back at Stephen. "That's my cue," she said, but neither of them moved. The spotlight was searching the crowd for her, and James Peterson was beginning to look panicked. "Go," Stephen said softly, but his hand reached out instinctively, catching hers for just a moment. The touch was electric, familiar despite the years. "I'll be right here when you're done." Maya squeezed his hand briefly, then made her way to the stage with the poise of someone accustomed to public speaking. Stephen watched her go, marveling at the woman she'd become, while simultaneously remembering the girl she'd been. As Maya took the podium, the ballroom fell silent. She looked out over the crowd of San Francisco's elite, with the same passion Stephen remembered from their late-night conversations about changing the world. 15 years ago, Maya began, her voice clear and confident, I was a graduate student with big dreams and very little money, convinced that education could change everything. Tonight, I stand before you as someone who has seen those dreams become reality, one student at a time. Stephen leaned against a pillar, completely captivated. This was the Maya he remembered. Brilliant, passionate, articulate. But now she had the platform and the credibility to make the impact she'd always dreamed of. But I didn't get here alone, Maya continued, and for just a moment, her eyes found Stephen's in the crowd. I had people who believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. People who saw potential when all I saw were obstacles. Education isn't just about books and tests. It's about human connection, about someone caring enough to invest in another person's future. As she spoke about her programs, showing slides of students who had gone from struggling readers to college graduates, Stephen felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what she'd accomplished, regret for the time they'd lost, and something deeper, a recognition that the connection they'd shared had been more significant than he'd allowed himself to remember. The audience was completely engaged now, hanging on her every word as she described innovative teaching methods and community partnerships. Stephen noticed several people around him wiping away tears as Maya told the story of Marcus, a former gang member who was now a teacher himself, thanks to one of her programs. The truth is, Maya said, wrapping up her speech, every child deserves someone who believes they can achieve greatness. Not just athletic greatness or academic greatness, but the greatness of becoming a person who contributes to their community, who lifts others up, who remembers where they came from, and reaches back to help. The applause was thunderous, and Stephen found himself clapping harder than anyone else in the room. As Maya left the stage, several people approached her immediately. Donors wanting to fund her programs, educators seeking advice, politicians looking for photo opportunities. But her eyes kept searching the crowd until they found Stephen again. He waited patiently as she navigated the post-speech networking requirements, watching her handle each conversation with grace and genuine interest. The woman commanding the room's attention was light years from the graduate student he'd known, yet somehow she was exactly the same person he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Dr. Rodriguez, that was absolutely inspiring, gushed a tech entrepreneur. I'd love to discuss a potential partnership with my foundation. I'd be delighted to explore that, Maya replied professionally, handing him her business card. Please have your team reach out to mine, and we'll set up a meeting. Stephen watched this dance of philanthropy and networking with new eyes. He'd been part of this world for years, but seeing Maya navigate it with such purpose reminded him of why these events mattered beyond the photo opportunities and tax write-offs. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Maya excused herself and made her way back to where Stephen waited. The crowd had thinned slightly as people moved toward the cocktail reception in the adjacent room, giving them a moment of relative privacy. That was incredible, Maya. Really, you're changing lives out there. She smiled, but he could see the exhaustion behind her professional composure. Thank you. It's been a long road, but seeing kids like Marcus succeed makes every struggle worth it. They stood there again, surrounded by the remnants of the formal dinner, but somehow isolated in their own bubble of shared history and mutual respect. Stephen, I have to ask, Maya said quietly, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. Are you happy? Really happy? I see you on TV, all the success, the championships, but the question caught him off guard with its intimacy. In a world where everyone wanted to know about his game stats or business ventures, Maya was asking about his soul. Stephen's carefully maintained public smile faltered for just a moment, and Maya saw a glimpse of something vulnerable in his eyes, the same uncertainty she remembered from their college days when he'd worry about living up to expectations. Can we? Stephen gestured toward the hotel's terrace, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Would you mind if we stepped outside for a minute? It's getting pretty crowded in here. Maya nodded, and they made their way through the cocktail reception. Stephen graciously acknowledging well-wishers and photo requests, but clearly eager to reach their destination. The October evening was crisp, but not cold, and the terrace offered a stunning view of the San Francisco Bay, lights twinkling across the water like earthbound stars. They found a quiet corner away from the other guests who had stepped outside for air or phone calls. The city hummed below them, but up here, 17 floors above the street, it felt like they existed in their own world. To answer your question, Stephen said, leaning against the railing and looking out at the water, I am happy. But it's complicated, you know? Success in professional sports isn't like other careers. Every game is scrutinized, every decision analyzed. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of just playing basketball because I loved it. Maya studied his profile in the ambient light. From the ballroom. Do you remember that conversation we had in the library? You were stressed about the NBA draft, wondering if you should declare early or finish your degree first. Stephen turned to look at her, surprised. You remember that? I remember everything about those conversations. You were so torn between following your dream and doing what you thought was the responsible thing. I told you that sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is trust yourself enough to take the leap. And I told you that I was scared I wasn't good enough, that I'd embarrass myself and end up with nothing. Stephen's voice was soft with the memory. You said that fear was just proof that it mattered to me. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the years between them feeling simultaneously vast and non-existent. I followed your career, you know, Maya said quietly. Every championship, every record you broke. I was proud of you, even though we hadn't spoken in years. Seeing you succeed felt like watching a friend achieve their dreams. Stephen felt something tighten in his chest. I looked for you too, especially after I got established in the league and started my foundation. I wanted to reconnect, to see how you were doing, but I didn't know if that would be appropriate. You were probably married, building your own life. I was married, Maya said, her voice neutral. For about 5 years. It didn't work out. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Stephen felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness that she'd experienced divorce, relief that she was currently single, and guilt for feeling relieved. I'm sorry, he said simply. Divorce is never easy. Maya shrugged, but he could see the carefully controlled emotion in her expression. We wanted different things. He was a wonderful man, but he thought my work was excessive. He wanted me to scale back, focus on family planning instead of program expansion. It became clear that we had fundamentally different views on what a partnership should look like. Your work isn't excessive, Stephen said firmly. It's essential. What you're doing for those kids, Maya, you're literally changing the trajectory of lives. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. The intensity in his voice surprised them both. Maya looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, mixed with old affection. What about you? She asked. I know about Aisha, the kids. You seem to have built a beautiful family. Stephen's face lit up in a way that was impossible to fake. They're everything to me. Riley, Ryan, Cannon, and Caius. They keep me grounded, remind me what really matters. And Aisha, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. She's an incredible mother, a successful entrepreneur in her own right. We've built a good life together. Maya noticed what he didn't say as much as what he did. There was love in his voice when he talked about his children, respect when he mentioned his wife, but something was missing from the equation. Not unhappiness exactly, but perhaps an acceptance of contentment rather than passion. But, she prompted gently. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with thoughts he'd never voiced aloud. But sometimes I wonder about the roads not taken, you know? Not that I regret the choices I've made. I don't. My family is my priority, always. But sometimes I think about what it would have been like to have someone who shared my passion for the foundation work, someone who understood why I care so much about giving back. Aisha doesn't share that interest? She's supportive, Stephen said carefully. But it's not her calling the way it is mine. She has her own businesses, her own interests. We're partners in parenting and in building our family's future, but we don't collaborate on the things that drive me outside of basketball. Maya understood what he wasn't saying. She'd lived it herself. The loneliness of being with someone who loved you but didn't share your deeper purpose, who supported your work without truly understanding why it consumed you. I think about our conversations sometimes, she admitted. The way we used to talk for hours about changing the world, about using whatever platform we had to make a difference. You were the only person who really understood why I wanted to work in underserved communities, instead of pursuing more lucrative opportunities. And you were the only person who understood that, for me, basketball was never just about basketball. It was about the platform it could give me to impact lives. They looked at each other in the soft light filtering from the ballroom, both recognizing the profound connection they'd shared, and wondering what might have been if circumstances had been different. "Stephen, Maya, there you are!" James Peterson's voice cut through their moment as he appeared on the terrace, with a small entourage. "Maya, the Chronicle wants to get a photo of you with Stephen for tomorrow's coverage of the event. And Stephen, we're about to start the live auction. We really need you back inside." The spell was broken, but something had shifted between them. As they walked back toward the ballroom, Maya felt Stephen's hand brush against hers, not quite holding it, but maintaining a connection. "Will you stay for the rest of the evening?" he asked quietly as they reached the doors. "I have to," Maya replied with a small smile. "I'm presenting the final award of the night." Stephen felt a relief that was probably more intense than appropriate, but he didn't analyze it too closely. Whatever was happening between them, whatever this reconnection meant, he wasn't ready for it to end. The live auction was in full swing, with items ranging from exclusive vacation packages to signed sports memorabilia commanding impressive bids from the assembled philanthropists. Stephen had just helped auction off a private basketball clinic experience for $75,000, his natural charisma and humor driving up the bidding far beyond the organizers' expectations. But even as he worked the crowd with professional ease, his attention kept drifting to Maya, who was seated at a table near the stage, taking notes and occasionally checking her phone. He found himself studying her expressions, the way she smiled when a particularly high bid came in, the focused look she got when reviewing her presentation materials. "Ladies and gentlemen," James Peterson announced as the auction concluded, "we've raised over $2.3 million tonight for youth education initiatives across California. But before we close, we have one final presentation. Dr. Maya Rodriguez will be presenting our Lifetime Achievement Award to someone who has made an extraordinary impact on educational opportunities for young people." Maya took the stage again, this time carrying a crystal award that caught the ballroom's lights beautifully. Stephen assumed she would be honoring one of the veteran educators or longtime donors in attendance. "Tonight's recipient," Maya began, "might surprise some of you. While he's known globally for his achievements on the basketball court, his off-court contributions to education have been equally remarkable, though often overshadowed by his athletic success." Stephen felt a strange flutter in his stomach as Maya's eyes found his in the crowd. "Through his foundation, he has funded over 200 scholarships for underprivileged students, built 3 community learning centers, and supported literacy programs that have reached more than 10,000 children. But more than the numbers, it's his personal involvement that sets him apart. He doesn't just write checks, he shows up, he mentors, he believes in the power of education to transform lives." The ballroom was completely silent now, everyone following Maya's gaze toward Stephen, who was beginning to realize what was happening. "Stephen Curry, could you please join me on stage?" The applause was immediate and thunderous, but Stephen felt frozen in place. This wasn't just unexpected. It felt deeply personal, coming from Maya. As he made his way to the stage, his mind raced with questions about how this had been arranged, whether Maya had known she'd be presenting to him, whether this was coincidence or something more deliberate. On stage, they stood facing each other with the award between them, both acutely aware of the cameras capturing every moment, the room full of people watching their interaction with keen interest. "I have to confess something," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "When I was asked to present this award, I was told the recipient was someone whose commitment to education matched their success in their primary field. I said yes, without knowing who it was, because anyone deserving of such recognition was someone I wanted to honor." She paused, looking directly at Stephen with an expression that was professional but warm. "When I learned it was Stephen, I was shocked, but not surprised. This is exactly who he was 15 years ago when I knew him as a college student. Someone who understood that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others up." Stephen accepted the award, but as Maya handed it to him, she also pressed a small piece of paper into his palm. The exchange was subtle, likely invisible to the cameras, but the touch of her fingers against his sent electricity through his entire body. "Thank you," Stephen said into the microphone, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "This means more to me than any basketball award I've ever received. Education was my first passion before basketball, and it will be my lasting legacy after basketball. To receive this recognition from Dr. Rodriguez, someone whose own work has inspired my foundation's direction, is truly humbling." The applause continued as they stood together on stage, and for a moment, the rest of the room faded away. Stephen wanted to say more, wanted to tell the crowd about the woman beside him, about how she'd influenced not just his approach to education, but his entire understanding of what it meant to make a difference. But this wasn't the time or place for such personal revelations. As they left the stage together, Stephen carefully palmed the piece of paper Maya had given him. The evening was officially over, but the ballroom buzz continued as guests networked and made plans for follow-up meetings. "I should probably make my rounds, thank some people before I leave," Maya said, but she made no move to walk away. "Yeah, me too," Stephen replied, but he was already unfolding the small piece of paper. In Maya's familiar handwriting were just a few words. "Coffee tomorrow? I'm staying at the Fairmont, room 1247. Stephen looked up to find Maya watching his reaction. She smiled, not the professional smile she'd worn all evening, but something more vulnerable and hopeful. "I fly back to Los Angeles tomorrow afternoon," she said quietly, "but I thought maybe we could talk more. Away from all this." She gestured around the ballroom. "I'd like that," Stephen said, and the simple words carried the weight of 15 years of wondering. "Stephen, there's my champion," boomed a familiar voice as David West approached with several other former NBA players who had attended the event. "Man, you killed it tonight. That auction segment was brilliant." Stephen introduced Maya to his friends, watching with pride as they immediately recognized her name and work. But even as he engaged in the expected social interactions, part of his mind was already focused on tomorrow morning, on the conversation that would happen away from cameras and crowds, and the weight of their public personas. As the evening finally wound down, and guests began making their way to the valet stand, Stephen found himself walking Maya to her car. The October night had grown cooler, and she pulled her wrap closer around her shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached her rental car. "Not just for accepting the award graciously, but for being exactly who I hoped you'd become." "Maya," Stephen started, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the complex emotions of the evening. "Seeing you tonight, learning about everything you've accomplished, it reminded me of something I think I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That some connections transcend time. That some people shape you in ways that last forever, even when they're not in your life anymore." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, but she maintained her composure. "I'll see you tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely. 10 o'clock? Perfect." As Maya drove away, Stephen stood in the cool night air for a long moment, the Crystal Award in one hand and her note in the other. Tomorrow would bring complicated questions about boundaries and appropriate behavior, about loyalty to existing commitments and the temptation of roads not taken. But tonight, for the first time in years, Stephen Curry felt truly seen. Not as a basketball star or a brand, or even as a husband and father, but as the young man who had once dreamed of changing the world and had never quite lost sight of that dream, even amid all the success and responsibilities that had followed. The valet brought his car around, and Stephen drove home through the quiet San Francisco streets, his mind already composing the conversation he would have with his wife about an old friend and a coffee meeting, and feelings that he wasn't quite ready to name, but could no longer ignore. Some games, he reflected, were played on courts with clear rules and defined endings. Others were played in the heart, where the stakes were infinitely higher and the outcomes far less certain. As he pulled into his driveway, Stephen realized he was about to play the most important game of his life, one where winning and losing might be impossible to distinguish, and where the only certainty was that everything was about to change. The story ends here, but the emotions linger, a testament to the enduring power of first love, the complexity of adult choices, and the moments that remind us who we truly are beneath all the roles we play. In the morning, Stephen Curry would face a choice that would define not just his future, but his understanding of what it means to live authentically in a world that demands perfection from its heroes. Sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is acknowledge that their heart still knows how to feel, even when feeling threatens to complicate everything they've built. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't won on a basketball court, but in a hotel coffee shop where two people who once knew each other completely must decide if they're brave enough to discover who they've become.